From immigration to U.S. foreign policy, Democratic presidential hopefuls squared off in their third debate. Hello, I'm Anand Naidu, and this is The Heat. For the first time, the top 10 U.S. presidential Democratic candidates shared the same stage on Thursday in Houston, Texas. The candidates addressed a number of issues during the three-hour debate, including the U.S. China trade war, immigration, gun control, and climate change. Frontrunner and former U.S. Vice President Joe Biden found himself on the defense once again, while other candidates called for party unity. Well, for complete analysis of the debates, let's bring in our panel. Joining us here in the studio is Eleanor Clift. She's a political columnist for The Daily Beast. Lester Munson is a principal at BGR Group, a government relations firm. From the Associated Press Studios in Washington, D.C., Rafael Bernal is a staff writer for the U.S. political newspaper The Hill. Also joining us, my colleague, CGTN White House correspondent Nathan King. Welcome to all of you. Nathan, let me start with you. What was your assessment of the debate last night?
Well, it's actually a pretty good debate. I mean, finally, we might sort of be seeing some sort of candidates that we could actually see maybe run for president next year. I mean, you know, it's exhausting, this race, and we're still way over a year out between who we know the next president is going to be. But what I thought it was good, especially for people who, you know, aren't American citizens and watching from outside, is what the Democratic Party might be about next year. And there was a really good debate about that on the things that really matter to Americans. Healthcare. I thought the gun debate was absolutely brilliant. I mean, it really was important. Also, there was a debate on China as well, which we hadn't seen. In fact, I think it was partly because John Bolton had been fired, you know, there was a good debate on national security. So I thought, you know, we've had several debates. I can't remember how many we've had since then, but this was, if you're going to start watching, it wasn't a bad one to start.
Eleanor, what did you think?
I agree with Nathan, and I thought the Vice President Biden, was able to draw a contrast with Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren on the issue of health care. And Sanders and Warren represent the more progressive activist side. They're calling for big structural change and a grassroots revolution. And Biden is basically talking about building on Obama health care. And that's a huge division within the party. And it represents a clash, really, between Democratic traditionalists and older people, and this new wave of young activists who really want to really remake the government. And the realists, who I would put Biden in that camp, understand how difficult it is to get anything through the U.S. Congress, whereas the activists think, well, this didn't happen because they didn't try hard enough. So we're going to continue to have this debate. And it looks, at this point, it looks like a three-way race with Biden against Warren and Sanders, who are in second and third place alternately. And they have a non-aggression pact between the two of them. They're not going to actively criticize the other. And so it's kind of 2 against 1, but last night it was more than 2 against 1, I guess.
Yeah, what did you make of the format of the debate, Eleanor? I mean, the idea, of course, is for these candidates to get their ideas across to the public. Was it more streamlined, more coherent than the previous ones?
I thought it was, yes. There wasn't as much cutting them off in the middle of a statement. And I don't know how many people lasted the whole 3 hours, but the last question was about resilience and how each of them would describe this moment in their life. And I thought that was really good, because these candidates are still introducing themselves to the voters. Most of the voters don't really know who's running. And you know, Biden drew on his personal background, and Amy Klobuchar, who I think is doing well in the race, you know, talked about her alcoholic father and how experiences with him drove her into public service. So it had its personal side, and there were clashes, but they weren't, you know, beating up on each other, and they weren't beating up on President Obama. That they did the last time. What a mistake that was, since he's very popular among Democrats.
Lester, what would Republicans have made of this debate?
Well, I think Republicans the ones at least who realize that they may have a crazy candidate on their hands are really hoping that their guy will be able to run against a socialist. They want the choice to be between crazy and socialist. They think crazy could win that. So I think the fact that Vice President Biden did reasonably well in this debate and kind of held off some of the challenges from the progressives or the socialists like Castro, who kind of attacked him in a personal sense. The fact that Biden stood up there with some dignity and was able to hold his ground is probably bad news for Republicans. Joe Biden does make for a pretty good, compelling candidate
it's
against
that
Donald Trump.
electability thing, isn't it?
It's electability, and he's seen as normal, and he's going to do things that aren't embarrassing to people. He doesn't go too far to the left. He's really the most dangerous candidate for Donald Trump, and he seemed to do pretty well last night.
All right, let's go to Rafael. Rafael, there was an interesting piece in this morning's New York Times written by Mexico's former Foreign Minister Jorge Castañeda, in which he said, and I'm quoting here, he said, perhaps the most notable feature of the Democratic presidential debate was what the candidates did not say about Latin America, immigration, asylum, and border security. Do you agree?
Yeah, it's fair. I mean, that's a very Jorge Castañeda kind of thing to say. It is fair that the section on Latin America, while it existed, Jorge Ramos did a good job of bringing it in as a debate moderator. It existed, but it was very brief. It basically, it served mainly for Bernie Sanders to say that he doesn't support Nicolás Maduro, the president of Venezuela, which, frankly, I mean, the accusations that he ever has supported Nicolás Maduro are not serious. So it did him a favor because it sort of weakens the argument of dangerous socialism against him. But it is interesting that Latin America was at least alluded to as one of the most important foreign policy challenges for the United States, which it always has been simply by virtue of being right here. But it's been either largely ignored or grossly mismanaged throughout history, with a few exceptions. Interestingly enough, the one exception is probably NAFTA. Most people agree, and Bernie Sanders went hard against NAFTA, a position he hasn't changed for 25 years.
Nathan, of course, candidates were also asked about the United States-China trade war. Here's what two of them had to say. Let's watch this.
Yeah.
What he has done here, he has assessed these tariffs on our allies. He has put us in the middle of this trade war, and he is treating our farmers and our workers like poker chips in one of his bankrupt casinos. And if we are not careful, he is going to bankrupt this country. One forecast recently says that it has already cost us 300,000 jobs.
Our trade policy in America has been broken for decades, and it has been broken because it works for giant multinational corporations and not for much of anyone else. These are giant corporations that, shoot, if they can save a nickel by moving a job to a foreign country, they'll do it in a heartbeat. And yet, for decades now, who's been whispering in the ears of our trade negotiators? Who has shaped our trade policy? It's been the giant corporations.
So we heard there, Nathan, from Amy Klobuchar and Elizabeth Warren. The Democrats, we know, also want to reshape the trade relationship between the United States and China. But we didn't hear anything concrete in this debate, did we?
Well, our producers did a great job, because I think those were the two really strong people on this. And, you know, as people who analyze the U.S. China relationship, it was great to hear from the Democratic candidates, because while they've all been sort of against the tariffs and how they've been handled, what policy they would do instead has been a little bit muddled. And what you heard there from maybe Klobuchar, Minnesota, farm state, they're suffering, soybeans aren't being bought, Silicon Valley somehow may get a good deal, but will the farmers? There's that regional feeling, and she put that down there. Well, Elizabeth Warren went on to say, and I would warn all my Chinese colleagues to listen to Elizabeth Warren, because if you think Trump's bad, she said, at the table shouldn't be the big corporations, it should be the unions, human rights activists, everyone else. These are constituencies in the US that will actually push China even harder for reforms than the Trump administration. So while everyone agrees, and I think the consensus opinion is that, okay, you want to do this, and remember, this is a domestic audience here. This is not, you know, why you want to do this, you should have got allies, you should have had a plan, there should have been an off-ramp, all that sort of stuff. But if someone like Elizabeth Warren becomes the candidate, expect actually even tougher talk when it comes to changing the relationship with China, not just on trade, but the whole relationship as well that we've seen from the Trump administration.
Yeah, but Nathan, we also know that campaigning is easy. Ruling is far more difficult.
What did Trump say in the campaign? China, China, China. I'm just saying.
All right.
Don't discount it.
Eleanor, let's get into another specific, healthcare. Big issue in the United States. The Democrats' proposals, as you've just told us now, they range from Vice President Biden, who wants to build on this Affordable Care Act, which is also known as Obamacare, to Bernie Sanders, who wants this federal government-run Medicare for all system. We did hear some of the difference between President Biden and I think it was the youngest candidate on the stage, Julian Castro. He went after Joe Biden. Let's watch what happened.
The difference between what I support and what you support, Vice President Biden, is that you require them to opt in, and I would not require them to opt in. They would automatically be enrolled. They wouldn't have to buy in. That's a big difference, because Barack Obama's vision was not to leave 10 million people uncovered. He wanted every single person in this country covered. My plan would do that. Your plan would not.
They do not have to buy in. They do not have to buy in.
You just said that. You just said that 2 minutes ago. You just said 2 minutes ago that they would have to buy in. You said they would have to buy in.
Have to buy in. If she qualifies for Medicaid,
are you forgetting what you said 2 minutes ago?
Be in for it.
Really screwed up.
So the Vice President, Joe Biden, he's known for making mistakes. He struggles sometimes with expressing himself. Was that a cheap shot on the part of Castro?
Today, the media has been examining the exchange and concluded that Castro didn't have his facts right, and that Obama, well, easy to mistake them. Biden basically says build on Obamacare and provide a public option.
Right.
And when he says people are going to buy in, they can get into they can enter it. It's their choice.
Right.
Not
It
sure
didn't
he
necessarily
means.
mean money, did it?
Yeah, exactly. And I think there's been a lot of negative reaction to Castro that the issue was just a smokescreen to go after Biden on his age and whether he's competent enough to be president. And the people who've known Biden, and just about anybody in Washington does, because he's a very friendly guy and he's been around a long time. He's always he doesn't know when to stop talking. And Newsweek, I was with Newsweek for years, they did a whole column, which was one question that he asked. But so far, this is not reverberating on the campaign trail. I think people see these as, slips, not intentionally negative. And I think that what Castro really did look like a cheap shot. And he's going nowhere in the
especially
polls.
compared to the incumbent in the White House right now. You can sort of be forgiven in this environment for a few misstatements, can't you, considering what you might be running against?
All right, but talking about the incumbent, Nathan, could this hurt Biden later? Suppose he's the nominee for the Democrats.
Well, I mean, Biden, it depends how you look at this. But Biden's an elderly man, same as Donald Trump. You could actually see Trump not wanting to run against Biden because he looks like the sort of sensible alternative Trump. Also, if you look at where the Democrats have strength right now, it's not with the left wing of the party. They won the midterms on 40 seats going their way, not in the South Bronx, but in purple, red, blue areas in all over the country that traditionally lean Republican. They did a really good job, and that's where Biden is he's like the tortoise in the hare race. He's going to get there eventually, and he says, look, this is the message. It's electability in the general election, and we always have this in primaries, but he's essentially almost given up on the primary. He's just running the general election.
Well, he has this interesting combination where the black community likes him because he was Barack Obama's wingman for 8 years, and rural working class whites like him, and
union.
It's hard to put those two together, and I think there are real concerns about Elizabeth Warren and especially Bernie Sanders' electability.
Leslie, you want to say something?
Well, I just think, Joe Biden has been around for a while. He's got an amazing personal story. I'm not saying he's perfect. He certainly has his flaws, but there's a dignity to the man that was exposed in exactly that moment when Castro attacked him. And I think what, as impertinent and ill-advised as it was, what it really did was help Joe Biden and cement him as the front runner. And I think, and everyone else on that stage had to kind of, lean towards him and support him in that moment. So it really, it helped him. But he's got such a terrific personal story. The sacrifices he's made, his long record of public service. I certainly don't agree with him on many things, but he's a good man who's led a long, dignified life, and that makes him a very compelling candidate against President Trump.
Right. It's going to be hard to swift vote him, isn't it?
Yeah, Rafael, it seemed it was a bit of an open season against Joe Biden on Wednesday night. The issue of the deportations that took place during the Obama White House, 3 million people deported. That was brought up, and Biden, of course, was asked about that, and this was what he had to say. Let's watch this.
We didn't lock people up in cages. We didn't separate families. We didn't do all of those things, number one. Number two, by the time this is the president who came along with the DACA program. No one had ever done that before. This is the president who sent legislation to the desk saying he wants to find a pathway for the 11 million undocumented in the United States of America. This is the president who's done a great deal. So I'm proud to have served with him.
So, Rafael, Vice President Biden says there he was proud to serve with Barack Obama, but he was asked, I think, twice by the moderator, would you apologize for what you did at that time? He didn't answer that question.
He won't, and he intelligently stuck to President Obama, but his strategy of sticking to President Obama on everything goes beyond the immigration issue. He knows that he's going to have to do something on immigration, going to have to propose something on immigration that splits from what he and Obama did. And really, the way many Latinos see it is that Barack Obama did sort of leave the community hanging when he didn't go for comprehensive immigration reform and instead went for the Affordable Health Care Act in 2008. But DACA was a start in sort of healing that rift. It showed that Obama and Biden and Castro was in that cabinet as well. It doesn't mean that he accepted the White House position, but he didn't resign. He didn't protest it publicly. It means that administration realized that it had gone too far away from the Hispanics that helped get it elected, and tried to come back to a more central position. Frankly, immigration enforcement in the United States over the past decade and a half, since the end of the W administration, has been very strict, to put it mildly.
Yeah. Is there going to be a time that Joe Biden is going to have to say he's sorry because of what was maybe an overzealous implementation of immigration law at that time? Or will it hurt him?
I doubt he'll apologize, but he will definitely have to present a plan where he makes specific changes and takes on maybe Julian Castro's proposals for immigration. And it's relatively easy for him to do that because the Trump administration has made so many rule changes that have made immigration enforcement even stricter than it already was, that don't have to go through Congress. So that plan won't be difficult. And all these campaigns have a fair number of Latino advisors that have been connected to institutions that are well embedded in the community. And they'll have, kind of like Elizabeth Warren, they'll have a plan for it. I would be surprised if they didn't.
Yeah, I want to get to the Latino constituency in a moment. Lester, you wanted to say something?
Well, I have to say, I think it's a little startling that it's controversial for the vice president to say he's proud of his service in the Obama administration during a Democratic debate. I think that is evidence that the party has moved substantially to the left on the spectrum since the Obama administration. It's as a Republican, I find that very concerning. And I think if I were a Democrat partisan, I'd be a little leery on this immigration issue of going too far. Yes, President Trump says crazy stuff and his policies make no sense, and it's offensive in many regards. Right. That doesn't give you an excuse to go all the way to the other extreme. I think Democrats have to be very careful. President Obama, I think, was making some pretty sensible decisions on immigration at the end of the day. And if they go too far to the left, they risk losing that issue in the general election next year.
Right. And I know Biden was also accused of cherry-picking his role in the Obama administration.
Well, I think he's pretty much adhered to Obama in just about everything, and I would agree with what Lester just said. I think President Trump is going to run his re-election campaign on immigration, and he's, tougher policies and all of that. And the Democrats are divided on this, and some are calling for open borders and decriminalizing illegal crossings. And the danger that they have is that they're going to look like they care more about the immigrants than they care about the people in this country. So I think, you know, it's really a danger zone for the Democrats. But they do need, I think they have sensible ideas on immigration reform, sensible ideas that have been around there
Yeah, I mean, we
for
could go
20
back to
years.
George W. Bush.
That's right.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Rafael.
It's strange. From the perspective of the Latino community, it seems like most Democrats don't have any ideas on immigration. You know, there have been plans. Castro and Warren plans are there. O'Rourke has a history on this. But it really seems, going back to Obama's strategy on immigration won't be the sort of the strategy you need to win Arizona, to be competitive in Texas, to be competitive in Central Florida. Southern Florida is not so much immigration is not so much an issue from that perspective. But it is a difficult balancing act, because simply saying, you know, I'm going to do whatever Barack Obama did and whatever he did on immigration was great, is going to cost you votes with the second largest voting bloc in the country.
I don't think he said he's going to do whatever Obama did. And I think the Democrats do see I think it was 2014, the immigration reform bill that got 68 votes in the U.S. Senate as kind of a blueprint for what they would like to do.
Right. Lester, another big issue, of course, that was discussed, guns. Beto O'Rourke was very outspoken on guns. It, of course, was in his home state of Texas, where there were 2 mass shootings recently. The issue at stake for him was banning assault rifles, the AR-15 and the AK-47, which were weapons which were manufactured for the military to be used on a battlefield. But this is what he had to say. Let's listen.
In Odessa, I met the mother of a 15-year-old girl who was shot by an AR-15, and that mother watched her bleed to death over the course of an hour because so many other people were shot by that AR-15 in Odessa and Midland. There weren't enough ambulances to get to them in time. Hell yes, we're going to take your AR-15, your AK-47. We're not going to allow it to be used against our fellow Americans anymore.
It's very emotional. Is that going to sell with American voters?
Well, I think it's going to sell in the primary. I don't think it's going to sell in the general. One of the characterizations Republicans like to use of Democrats is they're going to come for your guns. Beto O'Rourke just said, we're going to come for your guns.
Already are. I think Liz Cheney today said they're going to confiscate your guns.
So it's an emotional issue, and I don't criticize anyone for their sympathy for the victims, of course. But I think a smarter strategy for the Democrats would be reasonable gun control measures. The president himself is very tempted to do that right now. It's clear that he doesn't want to not do something. I think there maybe is now a time for a middle ground on gun control between the Republicans and the Democrats. It'd be nice to see our leaders, when they're up on the stage like that in the national spotlight, say something to that effect. It'd be nice to see that we could come together on that. I'm afraid we're not going to see it until the primary's over, though.
I just want to add, you know, as an outsider with guns, you know, AK-47 and AR-15 are very, very different weapons than the average American gun owner has. In fact, if you look at NRA polling, people actually generally are for some sort of assault weapons ban like we had on the Clinton administration. And I think it's really helpful, actually. I mean, he won't get the nomination. But for someone like Buttigieg to come out and say, we're going to take your AR-15s and your AK-47s away, that's not a bad platform to actually split the gun lobby.
The AR-15 is actually a very popular weapon in the United States.
It is.
I don't think the AK-47.
No, I think the AK-47 is definitely more popular in Latin America and Africa and elsewhere.
And these are great advertisements for those weapons.
But you know, there is a big distinction between between gun owners who use them for defense and people who buy AR-15s. It's well been documented, and to try and split that constituency might work beyond a primary, maybe not using the same language, but I think Americans, if you look for all the polling, they are ready for some sort of gun control. There was an assault weapons ban before. There's no reason why it can't happen now, especially after all these tragedies.
Okay, Rafael?
Beto's making 2 calculations here. One of them is riskier than the other. On the policy end, that's a riskier one. He thinks, like you were saying in the studio, that at this point, Americans are tired of the shootings and will move toward this idea of restricting assault weapons, however you want to define assault weapons, but going back to this Clinton era. And politically, he's making the calculation that his political ascent came from being the guy who was morally consistent and said what he thought and sort of had it just connected to people in that way. And I think on the political side, right now in the primary, with the potential of being somebody's running mate, frankly, unless his numbers really start climbing, I think it's a smart strategy for him in this debate. It made him, it made him a point of conversation again, at least.
Well, all the other candidates were praising him for how he handled the shooting in El Paso, but I heard one pundit say that's because they don't see him as a threat, so they felt free to praise him.
Also, I mean, we had a genuine tragedy. I mean, he reacted well because, I mean, there was, it was horrible, but he dealt with it well. And
El Paso's his hometown.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
He dealt with it well. It may be more than just political consideration. I mean, he may actually care.
He certainly does care. But he's been refining his position on guns. He said this morning that it would be a voluntary turning over, but then he said, well, there would be a law passed banning it, and then you would assume people would follow the law. He said we wouldn't go house to house to confiscate weapons. Yeah. He handed the Republicans a nice little 30-second ad, unfortunately.
We've got a few minutes left. Nathan, what kind of impact do these debates have? Because if we let's look at Joe Biden, for instance. He was attacked, not in just this debate, in previous debates as well. And then, of course, you add on the self-inflicted wounds, if you like. He's still the front runner.
Yeah, he is. And I don't think anything really happened in the debate last night to say that he won't be in the next few days. But what it does do is for the people who really care about this race, and we're talking about Democratic primary voters, but also we're talking about the political machines around each candidate who literally go out and fundraise before, during, and after these. It's very important because it can create a spark that lifts a flagging campaign like Buttigieg, or brings someone like Andrew Yang and puts them next to the former vice president. Yeah. So this is really important. And also, there's a big tradition in the US, which, whether you like it or not, is quite admirable to see people 2 years away from an election sort of looking under the hood at all the various candidates, perhaps a little bit too much, but this actually does help. And it creates a record as well about what works, what doesn't. And so, I think it's not bad. I mean, the primary process kind of does that anyway. But, it's better than watching just another cop show on TV.
Okay, Eleanor, I only got 40 seconds left. Your assessment of the debate. I mean, some critics say it's superficial, it's entertainment. I mean, does it give voters a real idea of what these candidates
Well, if you're not a political junkie who's been following this race and you tuned in for the first time last night, I think you did get some introduction to the different candidates. And I thought it was substantive. They did talk about serious issues. And yeah, it's partly entertaining because that's what we demand. Politicians have to be performers. Go back to Ronald Reagan, who mostly everybody loves now. He was asked, how can you be a president if you've been an actor? And he said, how can you be a president if you haven't been an actor? So.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there. Thanks to all of you for being with us. That's it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for watching.